The story begins with a saint, a person who serves the gods. One saint is chosen by each god to receive divine oracles. Yet many hopefuls eventually give up and leave the temple when no oracle descends upon them. Still, countless others remain, training year after year, believing that if they work hard enough they too might one day be chosen. To become a saint is considered the highest honor, a blessing that could change the course of one's entire life. Among all these hopefuls, the chosen one was a young girl named Eleanor. Voluntarily, a baron's daughter with perfect posture and a slightly superior air, confronted Eleanor one morning. She spoke with a tone that balanced between pity and scolding. She told Eleanor she was being cruel. Even if Lord Crowl was mocked by many as an incompetent god with no real power, Eleanor was the one who had been chosen to serve him. She claimed Eleanor should feel grateful. Amalda repeated that she should be happy to serve him, as if insisting would make it true. Eleanor only sighed and muttered that Amalda had some nerve. After all, this entire problem began because of her. The god who had originally chosen Amalda was known as the weakest of all gods, the so-called incompetent god. Yet the very next day, before anything could settle, another oracle descended from the heavens. Another god wanted Amalda. And not just any god. It was Lord Granverite, the supreme god and the great king who ruled over all the others. It seemed Amalda decided instantly to abandon her first god and serve the supreme one instead. That decision left Lord Crowl without a saint, and so the eyes of the temple turned to Eleanor. Amalda apologized, or at least pretended to, insisting that when an oracle comes down no one can ignore it. She added that the oracle had been meant for her alone and she had no choice but to accept it. To become a saint one must possess enough magic to withstand the immense presence of a god. Amalda reminded Eleanor that she herself had trained since childhood yet still did not possess enough magic to be chosen. She claimed she had already accepted her limits and given up, but now fate had shifted. Then she remarked that Lord Crowl was so weak and harmless that she believed he would be perfect for Eleanor. She smiled and wrapped her hand around Eleanor's as if offering comfort. She called Eleanor her best friend and said she believed in her. But deep within her carefully controlled expression, Amalda was simply thinking that this troublesome responsibility belonged to Eleanor now and no one else. She urged Eleanor to go on and serve Lord Crowl. She said Eleanor had no choice but to accept it. But Eleanor had other plans. Feeling cornered by everyone's expectations, Eleanor ran deep into the nearby forest. She muttered to herself, wondering how life could be so unfair. She felt as if the incompetent god had simply been dumped on her without any consideration for her feelings. Her father offered no help at all. He told her he would sort things out eventually, but for now she should forgive him and be patient. His words only added to her frustration. A saint was the one and only special companion chosen by a god. To become one meant devoting one's entire life to that divine being. But Eleanor already had a fiancé, someone she had chosen herself. Once a person becomes a saint, they can never marry. The ceremony for her engagement had already been planned and could not be cancelled. She pictured her fiancé in her mind, a man with soft light-colored hair who had always smiled gently at her. Feeling lost, she headed toward a secluded house where Lord Crowl was said to be resting. She tried to calm herself by imagining this situation as temporary, a brief inconvenience that would resolve itself. Once she steadied her breath, Eleanor opened the door, determined to at least introduce herself properly instead of moping around. What she saw inside was nothing she had ever imagined. A massive dark blob pulsed quietly in the center of the room. Its form shimmered strangely, shifting as if made of fog and ink. Eleanor wondered if this bizarre creature was truly Lord Crowl. She had heard rumors, but nothing prepared her for this. She whispered a hesitant greeting, unsure if the being could even hear her. Without warning, the darkness lunged forward and enveloped her. She gasped, then froze as a deep yet oddly tired voice echoed around her. The blob spoke and confirmed that he was indeed the god she sought. Relief washed over her. At the very least he could communicate. People said the incompetent god was too foolish to understand human speech, yet clearly that was untrue. Lord Crowl asked her calmly if she needed something from him. Eleanor realized she needed to explain everything. She straightened her posture as best she could within the strange dark space and introduced herself as Eleanor Cladiel. She explained that she would be serving him from today onward. She added that she was only taking care of him temporarily, filling in for Lady Amalda. Finally, she politely asked that he treat her kindly. The god asked Eleanor if she was a substitute. Eleanor muttered that she technically was. She knew he had initially asked for Saint Amalda, but she had begged Lady Amalda to let her take the role instead. She wanted to be a saint so badly, and since their magic matched, Amalda reluctantly gave up her place before him. Eleanor added that if there was any problem he should punish her instead, because Saint Amalda had always kept him in her thoughts, but the god immediately knew that was a lie. He asked if the role had been forced on her instead. Eleanor began to sweat, and the god told her she was well aware of how he looked now, and what she should prefer. Even though she had been chosen as a saint, no one ever wanted to stay with him. The god told her he was hideous. Everyone ran away before even speaking to him, even the so-called pure and noble saints, but Eleanor knew that could not be right. As far as she knew, the records said that more saints stayed and fulfilled their duties than fled. The little black blob insisted that a young lady like Eleanor should not be here. The previous saint served for about a year, then was summoned by a higher-ranking god. They said it was because of the purity of her heart. When Eleanor looked around the house, it appeared as though it had never been cleaned. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs hung like gray curtains between the beams. The blob told her she did not need to come back tomorrow. He said he would not blame her. He would simply give the temple some excuses. Eleanor told him he was right. This dusty, filthy, and dark place was not where anyone wanted to live, so she would do as he said and leave. She began to walk away, but halfway to the door she stopped. Her eye twitched at the sight of a moldy teacup under the table. There was no way she could let a house stay in such a disgraceful state, not even a god's house. She announced that she was going to clean up. All she needed was a broom and a bucket. Meanwhile, the blob seemed to be arguing with another being who asked if he was seriously going to let her leave. The blob said it was fine since she was only a substitute saint, but the other voice scolded him, saying he was wrong to even call her that. Such disrespect should not be tolerated. The entity said that with one word from him, the other gods would rise up as well. He demanded that he show them his greatness, but the blob god thought he was not worth that much. He had lost his memories and his true form. He did not even know if he was still truly a god anymore. The voice told him he had absorbed too much of mankind's corruption. If he had a saint, it could have been purified. But that girl Amalda, chosen by the supreme god, had dared to reject being his saint. He wondered aloud if there could be a more obvious deceit. That puppet choosing a saint was impossible anyway. He warned that he did not have much time left. If even one more great corruption appeared, he would not survive it. A new saint had to come. But suddenly the blob god heard a strange noise complaining about something stuck in the corner. To his surprise, it was Eleanor. She bossily told him to move aside, a bucket and mop in her hands. But when she looked up, she saw a man. It was the god of war, Adlacion, the founding god of the nation and ranked second among the gods. His nature was cold and strict, and he showed no mercy to his enemies. He was feared not only by humans but even by gods. Eleanor could only wonder why such a fearsome god was in the blob god's room. She told him to wait as he said they had sent a powerless and ordinary girl in place of Amalda. He called the people in the temple fools who did not realize they were strangling themselves. Eleanor turned to the blob god, only to discover that Adlacion had vanished. She shrieked. The blob god reassured her that he was fine, and she fretted that she had thought he was being bullied. He told her cheerfully that Adlacion was actually very kind to him. He was known as a god of justice who despises evil. If someone were being bullied, he would rush in to protect them. Eleanor held her hands to her face, embarrassed she might have seemed rude. But the blob god was clearly pleased that she had shown concern for him. Still, he wondered why she went so far, especially since she was only a substitute. He reminded her that she did not need to deal with something as ugly as him. Eleanor could not lie. The god was certainly not a looker, and she knew that serving another handsome and highly ranked god would obviously be easier. She had trained for years dreaming of being chosen by one of them, but the god who chooses you is not up to you. It is something an aspiring saint must accept. So she decided what to do. She turned to the blob god and told him that no matter which god chose her, she would serve with all of her sincerity. So now that she had become his saint, she would give him her all. The god stared at her and asked if that was what it meant to be a saint. He thanked her. But Eleanor said she refused to be like everyone else who ran away. She would not lose to those who dodge responsibility and push their duty onto others. If anything, she was more motivated than ever to help him. The god smiled, telling her that if that was her decision, then he would be counting on her from now on. Eleanor smiled back at the little black blob, feeling oddly proud of her choice. Back at the dormitory for saints, Eleanor got herself ready for the day. It was the morning after she had become a stand-in saint, and today marked the day her real duties would begin. Once she had dreamed of being a saint, and now that she had accepted the role, she knew she could not simply quit halfway. It was not quite the ideal situation she had imagined, but none of that mattered anymore. Right now she was Lord Kral's saint. First she had to prepare the meals, which was always the saint's first job of the day. Meals for gods and saints were made in the temple's great dining hall. They were brought 3 times a day to the gods' rooms and eaten together with their saints. That was why Eleanor had to carry the food to his room every single time, which was unfortunately quite a long walk from the dormitory. Of course it was a hassle, but she had not returned to the dining hall since her training days, so she felt a flicker of excitement at the thought of seeing it again. Eleanor walked through the hall, delighted by the smell of breakfast and eager to catch a glimpse of the quiche she had dreamed about the night before. But suddenly, something struck her. A piece of food presumably thrown at her on purpose. She gasped and heard cruel voices echoing behind her. They sneered that Eleanor was filthy just like her master, and that the food might help wash her clean. The temple really was this sort of place. Backstabbing, gossip and tripping each other up were all everyday events. Eleanor could not stand it. A group of girls giggled, and Eleanor looked at them in disbelief. Naturally, they played innocent and insisted it was not them. Another girl added that they should keep their distance, because if they looked at Eleanor too long they might catch the incompetent god's curse. Eleanor snapped and demanded to know what they meant by that. But the girls scattered before she could say another word. It infuriated her. The irony of calling this place a temple. There was not a shred of purity anywhere. When Eleanor finally reached Kral's room, he anxiously asked if something had happened. Seeing the state she was in, Eleanor snapped at him and told him that this was the dining hall's doing. The difference in meal ranks was far too extreme. In fact, what they had given him was not even a proper meal. She looked at the moldy bread and the unpleasant soup, poking it apart to find anything edible. But Kral remained silent. Eleanor immediately realized she had messed up by placing the tray straight on the floor. The gesture felt like something a person would do to feed a pet. Kral explained calmly that a god did not need food to survive anyway. There were only two ways for a god to die. One was to be killed by another god. The other was to discard their own divine powers. In fact, he had not eaten anything for over 100 years. He told Eleanor not to worry about him and that she should enjoy her meal instead. But Eleanor muttered one phrase under her breath that caught his attention. She said, "Full course." Crowley blinked and asked what she meant. She told him she meant that the other gods received full-course meals. She had seen the extravagant dishes laid out in the dining hall, and if he did not even need to eat, then the whole effort felt pointless. Kral admitted that while he did not need food, he still naturally felt hunger. Eleanor told him sharply that if he felt hunger, then he was not fine after all. She added that after this she would be doing a big cleaning session, so he should hurry up and eat already. The blob god did not respond, only watching her rush out of the room. After a few hours, Eleanor made some progress with the cleaning, but no matter how many times she looked, the place hardly seemed to get better. The only blessing was that Kral's room was not very large, unlike the palaces or mansions other gods occupied. Amalda had been allowed to live in one of those, surrounded by her own maids. So much for a saint serving her god alone. Eleanor told Kral to shift so she could clean the other side. He immediately obeyed, squelching across the floor. Eleanor grew irritated to see that he made the area even dirtier. His black secretion oozed out of his body like thick tar. She wondered how something like that could be a god's bodily fluid. Krala shouted for her not to touch it, but it was already too late. Driven by curiosity, Eleanor dipped her finger into the substance. The ground beneath her rippled, softened, and then suddenly began to swallow her whole. It was pitch black in the room Eleanor landed in, and she could not see a thing. She shifted around in the darkness, her breath growing shallow as the air grew thick and heavy. Then she heard it, whispering. Countless voices, slithering through the darkness and curling into her ears. They kept repeating the same words. Kill her. Make her miserable. Suffer. The voices did not come from around her, but from inside her head, as if they clawed at her thoughts. Eleanor grabbed her ears and screamed for them to stop. Her knees trembled as a shadowy face surfaced from the blackness, staring straight at her with hollow eyes. The face spoke, telling her she felt the same way, that she hated someone too. Eleanor stared in confusion, trying to understand what the figure meant, but dark vines crept toward her. They wrapped around her arms, her waist, and finally pressed over her mouth. She struggled violently, screaming through the gaps, calling for help. Suddenly, a hand reached toward her. Eleanor clung to it desperately. A voice asked if she was all right. She wondered if it belonged to the Lord. Then everything blurred and she jolted awake. Eleanor found herself lying on the couch with Blob Kral beside her. She quickly explained she had been cleaning when she suddenly got swallowed by the mud, but a stranger had pulled her out. She asked if it was all a dream. To her shock, another voice answered from behind her. She was mistaken. Lord Elacion was standing there. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief and asked what he was doing here. Elacion replied that he just happened to come check on things. He told her she had touched the corruption, and if he had not intervened she would have been completely consumed by it. Eleanor asked what he meant by corruption. She only knew the stories. Corruption was born from human malice, from envy and hatred. Sometimes it spawned monsters, sometimes it caused disasters, and if a human touched it they would be swallowed and become part of it. But in modern times corruption rarely appeared. She wondered if it had been happening all along without anyone knowing. Krail apologized softly, saying he thought the corruption had been sealed inside him. But Elacion snapped that it was not Krail's corruption. As corruption came from humans, Krail was the one taking it on for them. Eleanor tried to make sense of this. If Krail absorbed it, then he was taking on pain and suffering that pierced straight into the heart. She remembered the horrible whispering. Krail told her she must have been terrified. Anyone would have been swallowed completely. He added that he was relieved she was safe. Eleanor then asked if he was always carrying those kinds of feelings. Krail simply said he had grown used to it. A few days passed and Eleanor curled up in her bed, unable to stop thinking. She kept replaying the corruption in Adlacion's words. Strangely, Krail was nothing like the incompetent god everyone claimed he was. Then, without warning, Adlacion appeared again. He told her she was correct. Krail did not even realize the burden he carried, yet he had been given such a cruel nickname. Eleanor groaned and told Adlacion to stop popping up out of nowhere. But Adlacion clicked his fingers, and Eleanor felt her body dissolve. She panicked, wondering if this was divine punishment. Instead, he handed her a pear. He told her he knew she had been having trouble eating. Eleanor thanked him, and he said it was nothing. It was the first time Lord Kral had eaten in a long while. They were the ones who should thank her. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Maybe Adlacion was much kinder than he appeared. She smiled and asked why he was telling her all this. Adlacion replied that her magical power was weak. If she had just a little more, she might be able to cleanse Krala's corruption and restore his true form. His words echoed in her mind. Could his true form be like any other god? Had he become this way because he carried the corruption of an entire nation? To call such a god incompetent, to lock him in a filthy room, to abandon him, it was too cruel. Eleanor knew she was only a stand-in, but she wondered if there was anything she could do. She was surprised at how much the thought weighed on her heart. Suddenly she stood up and shouted that a god should just say more of what he wanted. Being too kind could be a problem too. A voice answered her. Someone asked what she was talking about. Eleanor turned and saw a light-haired boy standing before her. He looked her up and down and said she was not as impressive as he expected. The boy tilted his head and asked if this was really the saint candidate. He clicked his tongue and said she was not nearly as impressive as he expected. Eleanor sat up glaring at him and demanded to know what he thought he was doing climbing into someone else's bed without permission. The boy laughed loudly, almost offended. He asked what she was doing to an innocent young boy like him. Eleanor scolded him immediately, saying that was her line. Sneaking into a maiden's room without permission, god or not, was unforgivable. The boy argued that a maiden does not suddenly shove someone out of bed either. Still, he told her not to worry, he would never lay a finger on her. His cheeky grin made Eleanor bristle. Even if he acted like a brat, he was still technically a god who protected the country. He then said she was not even his type to begin with. Eleanor threatened to toss him out of the window instead. He gasped, asking what she was doing and if this was really supposed to be a saint. He said he did not understand her taste at all. Eleanor scolded him for referring to Kral as that one. The boy rolled his eyes and said it was obvious. Of course he meant the one she went to visit every day. Eleanor blinked and asked if he meant Lord Kral, but the boy stopped her. Humans should not call him that. Now that she thought about it, even Lord Adlacion never used his name. He always referred to him as that one as well. According to the boy, Kral was only a name humans made up. The real name had been lost when he absorbed too much corruption and lost his memory. Eleanor was stunned. He had another name, and he had forgotten it as a god. She remembered how the founding myths listed every god's true name, so Krile should have been no exception. The boy explained that the name Krile belonged to some swamp spirit from folklore, not a divine being. That was not his real name. Eleanor asked if it could belong to a god who never appeared in the myths. The boy fell silent. Then he suggested something shocking. One of the gods might be a fake, using someone else's name as a disguise. Eleanor stared at him, asking if he was serious. Who would ever dare impersonate a god? Before she could finish, the boy rushed to her and covered her mouth. He whispered for her to stay silent. Someone was coming. More specifically, a woman. A voice outside called for Lord Lufree, asking where he had gone. The boy grimaced. It was Saint Rosalie. She approached the door, insisting she knew Lufree was close. She kept cooing his name, saying he could not fool her and that even a locked door would not stop her. Eleanor whispered that he should just go talk to her, but Lufree looked horrified. The last thing he wanted was to deal with Rosalie. He said that if anyone was going out to greet her, it would be Eleanor alone, but she must not reveal he was inside. Eleanor smirked wickedly. A god and a saint alone in a room together. Anyone could misunderstand. It almost looked like a scandal. Lufree promised she would pay for that comment. Eleanor stepped outside and was immediately tackled into an embrace by Rosalie, who had not even checked who she was hugging. The saint shrieked when she realized it was Eleanor. Eleanor calmly told her that Lufree was not there. Rosalie wrinkled her nose, asking what kind of smelly place this was. She declared she would never expect Lufree to appear in such a horrid location anyway. Rosalie leaned in and hissed at Eleanor, warning her not to tell anyone she was staying in the dormitory. If she did, she would not get away with it. Normally a saint lived in the same quarters or mansion as their god. If Rosalie was in the dorms, then things were clearly not going well. Maybe she was not getting along with her god. No wonder Lufree kept running away from her. When Eleanor returned inside, she muttered that choosing a girl like Rosalie as a saint was madness. Lufree sighed and admitted he was not even the one who chose her. Eleanor asked what he meant. She should have been chosen by an oracle, right? Lufree only shrugged as if the matter was trivial. A god could only directly aid a saint, and with other humans it was nothing more than small talk. But he learned that gods could deliver important messages through an oracle. Eleanor leaned closer, asking if that was why oracles and saints were held in such high regard. Lufree scoffed, saying if everyone was like her, the temple would have it easy. Who even verified what an oracle said? And if someone lied, who would be able to see through it? Eleanor's eyes widened, the room seeming to tilt. She asked him if he was telling the truth. Lufree told her there were hardly any real saints in this temple. The only god who personally chose his saint was probably Lord Adlacion. The rest were nobodies from who knew where. Eleanor's voice trembled as she asked why things were left this way. Fake saints were normally punished, but Lufree said humans were arrogant, and he did not see why he should go out of his way to do them a favor. Punishment was meant to correct people, and he had no reason to correct anyone. He simply did not care. Eleanor stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her whole life she had been told this country was loved by the gods, that they shielded their people, that this was why the land remained safe, untouched by monsters or natural disasters. To think all of that could be wrong made her chest tighten. Lufree gave her a lazy, almost amused look. Where did her confidence even come from? How did she simply assume she would be cared for even if she did nothing? He said he did not choose saints anymore, he did not share blessings, and he did not even live in the temple, though he admitted he popped his head in every now and then, just to see if things were falling apart. Eleanor did not know how to respond. Then he mentioned he was not as strict as that one. Eleanor blinked. Krall strict? That was impossible. If anything, he was gentle, patient, and endlessly kind. Lufree shook his head, saying humans only ever saw the surface. That one might be merciful, but he was far from kind. She would understand when she saw his original form, and if she was curious, she should try cleansing his corruption. Eleanor stiffened, knowing that was easier said than done. Lufree said a saint could cleanse it. But Eleanor always doubted herself. From the way Lord Adlacion spoke, she suspected there was some method, but the temple library held no answers. She turned to Lufree, asking if there truly was a way to cleanse corruption. Lufree stared at her for a long moment, and she could not help but grin, anticipation bubbling up inside her. He asked if she truly wanted to know, and she eagerly said yes. The method was simple. She needed to become a true saint. Without warning, Lufree grabbed her shoulders and pinned her down against the mattress. She squealed, flailing as he leaned close and whispered that a saint was a god's partner. They would sleep together, skin to skin. Eleanor shuddered so violently she nearly shook him off before she bounced back up and snapped that she could not. She had a fiancé, and the wedding date was already set. Lufree stared at her like she had lost her mind before bursting into laughter. There was no way a marriage with her would last, he said as he wiped tears from his eyes, and she would certainly get cheated on. Eleanor erupted, shouting that her marriage would be perfect and the wedding flawless, especially after all the work she had put in. She hired the capital's best seamstress to craft her gown and trusted the ring design to a famous artisan, and she was inheriting her sister's veil. But Lufree only sneered, saying it would not suit her anyway, and the whole thing sounded like a joke. That was it. Eleanor finally snapped. She grabbed him by the collar and threw him out with all the force she could muster, shouting at him never to come back. Lufree tumbled out of the room, still laughing, still mocking her as if her fury were the funniest thing he had ever seen. Eleanor fumed, shaking with frustration. How dare that brat torment her like this? She was one step away from her dream wedding. She would have the perfect ceremony and a peaceful, happy married life. She would make it happen no matter what. But then a letter arrived for Eleanor. She froze, staring at the seal as if it were a serpent's eye. Slowly she looked up in disbelief. Eleanor cleaned aggressively that day. Every sweep of the rag was practically an attack. Krell watched her in quiet concern. He said it was a great help that she had been cleaning since morning, but gently suggested she should take a break. Eleanor looked exhausted. Her hair clung to her face, her shoulders slumped, and her eyes were distant as if her mind was locked somewhere far away. It turned out that morning had brought her a letter. A very blunt, very cruel letter from Eric, her fiancé. He wrote that he heard about the situation from Count Claudiel, and now he understood the truth. She and her family had deceived him. The other day Lady Amalda visited his estate and told him everything. Amalda said that becoming a saint was Eleanor's lifelong wish, so she chose a hideous god as her partner instead of Eric. Then, unable to bear the god's ugliness, Eleanor supposedly ran crying to the count. Eric continued to write that Eleanor even tried to claim Amalda forced it on her, making Amalda look like the villain, but Amalda had cried, saying she only did what she thought would make Eleanor happy, never meaning harm. Eric wrote that he knew it was not Amalda's fault, not at all, and in the end he was done. Eleanor had betrayed him and he was disappointed in her. The letter ended with their engagement being cancelled. He explained that everything was already decided with her father. Since she was the one who ruined the engagement, he would be taking it further. Then, as if twisting a knife, he wrote that she should enjoy her life with the useless god she chose. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face all over again just thinking about it. She could not believe it. She was enraged, humiliated, and suddenly everything made sense. No wonder nothing had been moving forward no matter how long she waited. She had been stuck here for more than 10 days living at the temple and her life had only gotten worse. Meager meals, shabby treatment, endless chores. Every day Rosalie and her clique snickered behind her back in the dorms. There was no support from her father, no word from Eric. She realized she could never rely on either of them again. Krell approached her cautiously, and Eleanor snapped without meaning to. He stepped back in surprise before quietly asking if something had happened. Eleanor took a shaky breath and told him everything. How she was engaged, how he broke it off, how she now had to worry about compensation fees, and how her father had written that he could not defend her. She could not believe Eric was blaming her. It was Amalda who asked Eleanor to become a saint in the first place. And Eric believed Amalda after meeting her only once. It made Eleanor feel like every effort she ever put into him was meaningless. Eric and Eleanor were originally bound by a political marriage, but she never disliked him. He even warmed up enough to call her Noah. It might not have been love, but she believed they could have built something. A peaceful life, a steady companionship. But now that dream felt laughable. Between Amalda and her, of course, anyone would choose Amalda. Eleanor let out a weak, bitter laugh. Amalda was the perfect noble girl, practically glowing. Delicate like a doll, shy, gentle, and saint of the supreme god on top of it. Meanwhile, Eleanor was rough around the edges. Stubborn, blunt, practical. The opposite in every possible way. She sighed, saying she was sure Amalda never meant any harm. But being compared to her endlessly was unbearable. Eleanor told Krallis she was neither cute nor pure-hearted. But Krallis shook his head with quiet firmness. Eleanor laughed, insisting he did not need to sugarcoat it. She knew herself. Even a god would favor Amalda after seeing her. But Krallis disagreed again. He said it was true that Amalda was meant to be his saint at first, but that was before he knew Eleanor. Now he knew her and found her kind and lovely too, so he did not want her thinking so little of herself. Eleanor flushed and told him he was laying it on too thick. There was no way she could compare to Amalda, but Crowley told her he did not measure her against anyone. To him, she was the one who was wonderful. Eleanor was left speechless, and Blob only blinked beside her as if holding its breath. She muttered that she truly had been looking forward to getting married. She spent so long preparing everything. She was not sure when her yearning for marriage had grown so strong. Maybe it was after she failed her path to sainthood, or maybe it was when she saw her sister vowing love with her new husband. She too had been betrayed by her former fiancé who fell for Amalda, but her sister did not crumble. She fought back, rebuilt her life, and rose all the way to Duchess. She always called Amalda a natural disaster. Best to move on as fast as possible, she said. But Eleanor's sister never trusted the girl again. Seeing her sister stand so tall, so radiant was inspiring. And when Eleanor saw her sister in her wedding dress, she truly thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Marriage was supposed to be the last thing Eleanor cared about, but after she failed to become a saint, that sight became her new dream. The one day she could be the most beautiful in the world. She obsessed over it so much, even though it wasn't like her at all. She told Kral he could go ahead and laugh at her, but Kral said he wasn't going to laugh. He added that he could never laugh at something that meant so much to her. He understood that Eleanor truly longed for marriage, and she was left really looking forward to that day. And that was why it hurt and felt so unfair. He told her not to force herself to laugh either. He didn't want her belittling her own feelings. Eleanor's eyes widened. Even Lord Lufrey laughed it off. But Kral was different. Eleanor told him she ended up venting so much, then forced a smile and said she felt better. She got up to walk away, but Kral called after her. Eleanor ran out of his room and he chased after her, but she was already in tears by the time she left. Kral felt horrible, wondering how he couldn't even comfort the only saint who served him. He wished he could reach out his hand. Would he be able to show her more clearly than words that she was truly a captivating woman? He could have held her, wiped her tears, and stroked her hair, if not for this hideous form of his. The next morning, Eleanor came with breakfast. She looked at her god, who was sitting in a patch of light. He wished her a good morning, but Eleanor asked him what had happened to him. She noticed that the floor was no longer filthy and there was no stench at all. Crowley told her he couldn't explain it himself, but he looked different, no longer dark and gloomy. He looked a lot more squishy and cute now. Crowley told Eleanor she looked much better too, and she apologized for venting so much the other day. She said she felt better, but she was still angry. She had thought about it all last night, and she decided that when she and Eric met again for his compensation, she would face him directly. She decided she would throw the facts in his face and demand that he be the one to pay her. And if he didn't like it, he could bow his head and take back the annulment. She refused to cling to him, beg him, or ask him for pity. Krail told Eleanor it seemed like she had really taken her power back. But Eleanor did have a question for Krail. She told him it was a little awkward to ask. Krail told her there was no need to hold back with him now. So Eleanor asked if it was true that to purify corruption they had to share bodies. Krail was immediately flustered by her question. He asked her who taught her such nonsense. Eleanor asked if this meant it wasn't true, and Krail told her it was a big misunderstanding. Eleanor took a breath before firing up once again. After Eric, that god was next on her list. She would mop the floor with him. Krail explained that there were gods who did such things, but just holding hands was enough. Gods could suppress calamity by taking in corruption, but they couldn't erase it completely. To purify it, human magic was needed to counterbalance it. Skin-to-skin contact was more effective, but it also burdened the saint more. So in Eleanor's case, just light contact would be best. Eleanor asked if this meant just touching, and Krail agreed. Eleanor imagined them just holding hands, but suddenly she realized it couldn't be right. Krail noticed her face drop and asked her what the matter was. Eleanor told him the conversation was over, so she would carry on setting up breakfast. Eleanor looked at the blob, who reassured her that everything would be fine and it would not hurt. He told her to relax and that he would be gentle. The two of them looked quite suspicious from an outsider's perspective, but all that was happening was that Eleanor needed to hold on to Krail in order to purify him. She slid her hands around his body. Eleanor felt the squishy mass of his form. She told him he was not sticky at all. Krail guessed it might be because she had cleaned the room. Eleanor could not lie. Krail's texture was so addictive to touch. It was soft, springy, and smooth like a maiden's soft skin. She could not help herself and ended up putting her hands all over him. Crowell told her to stop touching him so much, then blurted out that he did not mind it, but she did not need to go that far just to purify the taint. Since that day, Crowell's body had definitely changed. Even when moving or eating, there were no signs of filth left behind. No stickiness at all. She wondered if she could get away with continuing to feel him up. Crowley told Eleanor they could do this properly, and Eleanor agreed. She held a single fingertip toward his body, and Crowley announced that he would release his corruption now. He said he would only give her as much as she could purify, so she could relax. According to him, corruption was born from people's hearts, and magic too was tied to the heart. Since they were both powers of the heart, when they connected, the stronger one prevailed. But Eleanor wondered if corruption meant those feelings. Crowell calmly said her name before telling her it was done. Eleanor looked up at her hands as Crowell thanked her for her effort. Eleanor was stunned. She had not done anything, but Crowell reassured her that this was how purification worked. It was not done all at once. It had to be purified little by little. If you tried to purify more than you could handle, it could consume you instead. And you could not do the next purification until you recovered the magic you used, so Crowell told her to take it easy and rest today. Eleanor accepted it, knowing it was true. Her magic felt completely drained. The amount of corruption you could purify depended on your magic power, which meant for her, all she could do at once was about a fingertip's worth. All Eleanor could wonder was how long this would take. She was supposed to restore a god whose entire body was filled with corruption. Crowell told her to relax, reminding her that everyone had their strengths and weaknesses. Eleanor cried, asking if this meant her magic was not enough. She knew this would take decades. But Crowell told her it would be fine. The more divine energy a god had, the more corruption they held. He was surely not that great a god, so it should not take too long. But Eleanor knew that was not true. What a saint truly needed was vast magic to cleanse corruption all at once. No wonder they had tried to choose Amalda as the saint. With Amalda's amount of magic, Crowell told Eleanor he was just happy that she even thought to purify his corruption, and perhaps one day they would find a better way. But for now, they should keep going without worrying too much. Crowell added that there was something else they should be worrying about right now. Eleanor made her way to the room, a tray of food in her hand. She was thinking about the one piece of furniture she had left. She had thrown it out during that big cleaning spree, and she could not even ask father since he had not replied to her last letter. She assumed he was still arguing with Eric, and she had no desire to go in and ask the temple either. Eleanor heard some voices and peeked behind a tree. There they were, 3 girls discussing something about a god ratting them out, and about the priests bowing and scraping just because someone's family was a count's house. Eleanor knew this discussion was about her, especially when the girls called her a fake saint. They said it was gross and wondered if she did not feel ashamed staying in the temple. Eleanor wondered if this conversation was truly about her. One of them said she would go along with an idea that girls like Eleanor would not learn unless they got hurt. And then Eleanor gathered that this girl was going to use magic. The girl held out her hand, casting a spell she proudly called being buried in garbage. Eleanor gasped as a dark cloud of filthy magic began forming. She stepped out from behind the tree, her voice sharp and trembling with anger. She demanded to know what they were doing. Being drenched in water was one thing, but being covered in rotten trash was far worse. She stood her ground and declared that she would drag them straight to the priests. The girl, who turned out to be Rosalie, went cold. Her eyes narrowed with contempt. She told Eleanor she was acting far too high and mighty for a filthy fake saint. Before she could say anything else, her friends grabbed her arms, hissing that they needed to leave before they all got punished. They dragged Rosalie away, her glare still fixed on Eleanor. Eleanor hurried back toward her room, heart pounding, when she suddenly heard someone call out to her. It was Lydianne, the eldest daughter of a duke. She leaned against a post with the confident air of someone who believed the world itself bowed for her. She told Eleanor she ought to be thankful. Eleanor realized this must be the girl the others had gossiped about, the one from the high-ranking house who was engaged to the second prince. She was also Lord Adlacion's saint, said to possess talent that rivaled the royal court mages. But on the other hand, Eleanor asked what she meant by coming out with such confidence. Lydianne crossed her arms and told her that she could protect herself. One thing Eleanor had forgotten to mention about Lydianne was her infamous reputation for pride and arrogance. Eleanor wagged her finger at her, asking if that was really how you talked to someone who saved you. Lydianne lifted an eyebrow and said Eleanor could have been hurt if she had tried to block that magic with such a flimsy tray. It would not have been worth the trouble. Eleanor was told she should feel lucky it had only been garbage. If it had been a stone or glass, the outcome could have been far more serious. Lydianne warned her not to act recklessly. If something were to happen to her, her god would certainly be sad. Lydianne seemed to know as much about Eleanor as Eleanor did about her. She told her she needed to be more careful in the future, because someone like her could easily repel magic like that without blinking. Eleanor blinked in surprise and asked how Lydianne even knew her name and about her god. Lydianne gave a bored shrug and said that if she did not know the other saints and their affairs, what kind of saint would she be? Eleanor explained that she was just a stand-in saint and a low-ranking one at that, but Lydianne cut her off, telling her she had no idea what she was talking about. There was no such thing as a rank among saints. It had been a long time since Eleanor had seen anyone treat a god like an actual god. Everyone else mocked Crowell without hesitation. Suddenly, a small hand tugged on Lydian's dress. A little boy stood there, and behind him peered a girl about the same age. They begged her not to fight. Lydian sighed and told them she was only talking. Their faces brightened immediately. She handed the pair a basket of food and sent them off before they could get scolded. Eleanor stared after them, stunned. Why were two children here at this hour? Then it clicked. Lydian was secretly soft. Eleanor's lips curled into a knowing smile. Lydian was a tsundere. Lydian noticed she had gone quiet and gave her a suspicious look. She shook Eleanor lightly, but Eleanor held on to her little smirk with perfect composure. As Lydian touched her sleeve, she froze. She had finally noticed how filthy Eleanor was. She told her she had better wash the moment she returned, but Eleanor brushed it off. Lydian was not having it. She ordered Eleanor to take off her clothes right now so she could find her another dress. Eleanor refused, and the two of them ended up grappling like children in the courtyard. Their tug-of-war only ended when a calm but commanding voice ordered them to stop. Eleanor stiffened. Standing there with two men behind her was Amalda. Eleanor knew immediately that this was about to become troublesome. Eleanor froze the moment she saw Amalda standing before her. Of all people, she really did not want to get involved with this girl. Amalda clasped her hands together and laughed, telling Eleanor that now that she was here, she had nothing to worry about. Eleanor blinked in confusion. How could Amalda show up out of nowhere and say something like that as her greeting? Amalda turned sharply to Lydian, her voice dripping with righteous anger. She said she would not allow Lydian to have her way any longer. She went on to say she had learned everything from Rosalie and knew that Lydian had been bullying the lower saints. She was shocked that a saint of Lord Adlacion would behave in such a disgraceful manner. Amalda declared she would never forgive Lydian for hurting her dearest friend. Now that she was here, Lydian would answer for all her sins. She continued accusing her of tormenting Eleanor. Eleanor stared at her with disbelief. None of this was true at all. And why was Amalda so desperately insisting they were best friends? She had not visited Eleanor even once since she moved to the temple. Eleanor stepped forward and told Amalda she was absolutely mistaken. Lady Lydian had never hurt her. But Amalda immediately came up with a new explanation, saying Eleanor was defending Lydian only because Lydian must have forced her to. Eleanor told her all of that was nonsense. She reminded Amalda that she knew very well all saints were equal and none of them were obligated to follow another's orders. Amalda and Lydian continued arguing without pausing for breath. Eleanor could tell it was useless. Neither of them was listening. Lydian denied bullying anyone and said she would never torment someone simply because they were beneath her. However, she did confess she had called Eleanor unsightly on one occasion. She insisted it was because she prided herself on honesty. She said she had no intention of making excuses, so if that made her the villain, then she would accept it. Eleanor grabbed Lydian's hand and told both of them that they were a terrible match. She marched Lydian away before either could escalate the fight further. Lydian tried to shake her off, insisting she wanted to settle this properly, but Eleanor refused to let go. Once they reached the quiet shade of the woods, Lydian demanded to know what Eleanor was thinking, dragging her along like that while fleeing from Amalda. Eleanor sighed and said that if they had remained there even a second longer, she would have been branded the villain without question. Lydian tossed her hair and said she could have handled the situation on her own. Eleanor told her she needed to apologize before she ended up losing her place in the temple. Lydian's eyes narrowed. She asked why she should apologize to the very girl who forced the saint title on her and wrecked her engagement. She reminded Eleanor she was the saint of the supreme god, so defying her could cause trouble. That was why everyone sided with her. They both knew the temple had been a mess for a long time, ever since the time at the count's house. Amalda was adored by everyone. Anyone who pushed back, like Eleanor's sister and herself, was painted as the villain. Eleanor admitted that her position never mattered in the first place, so if people hated her, then that was simply how it was. She then declared that Amalda was no longer her friend. In fact, she was her enemy now. Lydian looked at her and gave a small smile, saying Eleanor clearly was not interested in making life easier for herself. She told Eleanor she could address her however she liked, since none of them were above or beneath another. Their worldly ranks meant nothing because all of them served a sacred being. Eleanor smiled back, but Lydian immediately snapped and asked if she was mocking her. Later, at Lord Adlacion's mansion, Eleanor spent an evening that felt like a dream. She ate delicious food, soaked in a wonderfully hot bath, and relaxed until her whole body felt light again. Lydian told her she could ask for more food if she wanted, and there was no need to act modest. Eleanor knew Lydian had thought of everything, even bringing her a full change of clothes. But as she sat comfortably in the warm room with a full stomach, Eleanor found herself wishing Crowell were there too. She wanted him to try the delicious food as well. Lydian offered Eleanor anything she wanted: bread, soup, pastries, the works. There was far too much for the two of them to finish anyway. She complained that they kept sending food no matter how many times she refused, so at this point she did not know what to do with it all. Eleanor suddenly realized everything. It explained why she always saw Lydian handing food to the children outside. so Eleanor said she would gladly take some if it was truly up for offer. She thanked Lady Anne, but Lady Anne insisted there was no need. She said she was only pushing off what she did not need. Still, she reminded Eleanor to leave enough for their guest. By guest, Lady Anne meant Loufre, who appeared out of thin air yet again. He chuckled at the sight of the food and said he was starving. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. She asked if he had no pride at all, mooching off other people's meals. He was living comfortably in this mansion, and he had his own estate, which only made it worse. Loufre claimed his divine aura lingered here, and if he stayed elsewhere, that crazy woman would start chasing him again. Eleanor told him that his saints caused her nothing but trouble. But Loufre boomed that Rosalie was not his saint anymore, and he was done getting dragged into that mess. Eleanor told him not to dump that nonsense on her. If he created the chaos, then he should take responsibility and deal with Rosalie himself. Meanwhile, Eleanor was far too focused on the tart she was devouring. It was probably the best thing she had ever tasted. Lady Anne sighed and asked if Eleanor was truly calling something as simple as that tart delicious. She said it was nothing special. Loufre then remarked that Lady Anne could never be honest. It turned out she had made the tart herself. He exposed her for how she practiced endlessly just to bake one for Lord Adlacion, only for him to be so dense he never realized it. Loufre added that since she refused to tell him herself, he would probably never know. Lady Anne snapped at Loufre, demanding to know what his problem was. She snapped at Eleanor too, accusing her of teaming up with Loufre just to tease her. Before either could defend themselves, a deep voice approached. He said it was rare for Lady Anne to bring guests home, and even rarer that she had become the saint of that one. He asked if they had become friends recently and called her Lady. Eleanor was stunned. Even Lord Adlacion could make an expression like that. Lady Anne cringed when she saw him. She quickly insisted he should not get the wrong idea. Eleanor was not her friend or anything. But when Adlacion asked why Eleanor was here, Lady Anne clamped a hand over Eleanor's mouth the moment she tried to speak. Lady Anne hurriedly explained that she noticed Eleanor looking hungry. She hissed at Eleanor not to utter another word. Eleanor whispered to Lady Anne, asking if she should tell Adlacion the truth, but Lady Anne warned her that he did not have time for anything petty. She did not want to bother him. Later that evening, Adlacion told Eleanor that she was welcome to visit again. He said it had been a long time since he had seen Lady look that happy. He even walked her to the door, explaining that the roads at night were dark and that walking alone in the temple grounds could be dangerous. This unfortunately meant Loufre had to escort her home. Neither of them liked the idea. Eleanor snapped at him to take it up with Lord Adlacion before he took it out on her. Loufre retorted that no one would bother attacking her anyway since she had an ugly face and an ugly personality. Eleanor replied that she could say the same for him. Loufre reminded her he was a god, and she fired back that he should try acting like one. Loufre stormed off and said he felt sorry for the poor fiancé who had to marry her. He claimed the relationship would never last and any man would prefer a cute and quiet girl over Eleanor. He went on saying her fiancé was probably already thinking of dumping her and finding someone else. But before he could continue, Eleanor dropped the truth on him. He already had. Loufre immediately fell silent. Eleanor told him her engagement had been broken off. Loufre instantly apologized, saying he had not meant it like that. Eleanor said it was fine. What he said was true. She was not quiet and she was not cute. But she had no intention of becoming meek just to please anyone. Loufre insisted it was not like that, but Eleanor cut him off. She said she no longer cared. She planned to make Eric regret breaking their engagement in his own way. Loufre was at a loss for words before asking what was wrong with her. She did not even seem upset. Eleanor hissed that she was sorry for disappointing him. She did feel down, like any normal person would. But someone comforted her. That person did not laugh at her dreams or deny her sadness or frustration. Loufre demanded to know who this idiot was since they clearly had terrible taste. Eleanor said there was nothing wrong with it if it made her happy. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Loufre then asked if she was truly happy to be comforted, before calling her idiotic and simple-minded. He asked her if she liked the one who comforted her. Eleanor's eyes widened as she thought of Kral. Eleanor smiled as she handed Kral a tray of food. She proudly announced that it even had bread. Not the usual hard and jaw-breaking kind, but soft and fluffy bread that smelled warm and sweet. There was cheese and fruit too, arranged neatly beside it. Kral said it looked nice, and Eleanor poked his belly playfully, delighted by his reaction. Kral told her that if she was happy, he was happy too. But Eleanor asked if he was happy, truly happy, especially after such a good meal. She leaned forward and asked if there was anything else he wanted. Kral paused. Deep down, what he really wanted felt impossible to put into words. He was happy when he saw Eleanor smile. He liked when she came to visit him each day and talked to him. It felt warm when she touched him, and eating together was strangely fun. But aside from that, he did not know how to explain it. Eleanor encouraged him to try the soft bread, telling him it was the best thing ever. Kral took a piece and asked if she really liked it that much. Suddenly Eleanor froze. A thought struck her and she shrieked. She remembered Loufre's teasing words, accusing her of liking the person who cared for her and comforted her. She had been trying so hard not to think about that, yet now she could not escape it. It was ridiculous, or so she believed. This had nothing to do with her broken engagement. The issue was far stranger. Kral did not even look human. He was nothing like the other gods. Yes, he was kind and noble, but that only made the idea more absurd. To think she might like him. Eleanor forced herself to calm down. She told Kral she was only talking about food, and about how much he liked bread. Kral confirmed it, of course. The conversation was about food. He knew she did not mean anything odd. Then he asked if something had happened recently. He admitted that he sensed a faint trace of corruption around her. Eleanor gawked. Corruption? She asked what he meant. Kral explained that she had been exposed to someone else's negative emotions, not her own. All humans carry a little malice within themselves, and as long as it stays inside, it does no harm. But hatred or resentment that swells beyond control can manifest as corruption. He asked if anyone came to mind. Eleanor thought silently. A grudge or hatred too large to contain. Someone who was emotionally rotting from the inside. Kral told her to stay far away from whatever that might be. He instructed her to come to him if anything troubled her. He promised that no matter how dangerous the corruption became, he would protect her. Eleanor gasped, startled by the sincerity of his voice. Kral asked if something was wrong. Eleanor shook her head and said nothing. Instead, she asked if his promise meant he would take the corruption onto himself. That would completely defeat the purpose of purification. She insisted he did not need to worry about her. A few days later, Eleanor met Lydianne in the dining hall. Lydianne had brought more leftovers, something she was doing more often, and Eleanor found herself visiting the mansion more as well. Eleanor peeked into the basket and saw bright orange slices. Lydianne explained that she had baked an orange cake that morning, and the slices were what remained after she gave Lord Adlacion a piece. Lydianne tried her best to hide her excitement even though she had mentioned Adlacion. She asked Eleanor to tell her honestly what she thought of it. She admitted that if Adlacion discovered it was handmade, it might only trouble him. He might even refuse to eat it. But Eleanor doubted that. Before she could reassure Lydianne, an unwanted voice joined them. Rosalie approached with a twisted smile. She said she heard that all the fake saints were gathering together. She laughed in a cruel, wicked way. She mocked Lydianne's homemade cake and even ridiculed her for making it for Lord Adlacion. She stepped closer and declared that Adlacion would hate it. Eleanor finally snapped. She demanded to know why Rosalie was always picking fights and tormenting them. It seemed like she was holding some kind of grudge. Lydianne calmly explained that Rosalie held no grudge. She simply wanted to remind them of their place. If she did not, a substitute like Lydianne might foolishly start believing she was the real saint. Eleanor wondered what that was even supposed to mean. Everyone knew the story of Lord Adlacion's true saint. He was the founding god of the nation and his existence was unique. In his long thousand-year history, he had only ever chosen one true saint. That saint was the girl he loved during the founding of the nation and her reincarnations. 1,000 years ago, he descended from the heavens and fell deeply in love with a mortal girl. He defied the opposition of many gods and built a nation for her. In the end, he abandoned his divinity and became human just to live beside her. After his death as a mortal, he returned to being a god, but with many limits placed on him. When the nation faces crisis, he reincarnates into his royal descendants, and the girl returns as well to support him in his human form. In other words, as long as he remains a god in the temple, the true saint cannot exist. Anyone chosen now is only a temporary substitute. Rosalie laughed as she recited the tale. She said it was the most romantic story in the world, a love that survived through endless rebirths. She continued with a smug smile. Adlacion's heart had belonged to that girl for 1,000 years. Rosalie claimed she personally could never love someone who was already devoted to another. No matter how exalted a saint might be, if she was not loved, she was a failure, a replacement, a fake. She said the title suited Lydianne perfectly. Then she turned to Eleanor and said that it suited her too. Eleanor fired back instantly. She told Rosalie that she was the real fake, living in the dorms because Lord Loufre ran away from her. Eleanor added that Loufre was so frightened he would not even approach his own saint, which was far worse than being a substitute. Rosalie froze at those words, her expression twisting in shock and disbelief. She grabbed Eleanor's sleeve and begged her to explain how she knew. Eleanor only smiled thinly. If Rosalie truly wanted to know, she should ask her beloved god herself. Eleanor pulled Lydianne away, and they slipped into the quiet woods behind the hall. Eleanor glanced at her companion, asking if she was all right. She noticed how Lydianne had not fought back this time. Lydianne said she was not bothered by Rosalie's insults because they were true. She was not the one Lord Adlacion truly wanted. If she were the girl reborn, she would still remember his love. The reincarnated Lord Adlacion no longer possessed the body or power of a god. He guided the people with only the lingering echo of what he once was. That was why his true saint always retained her past life's memories so she could support him during his mortal incarnations. Lydianne had arrived at the temple knowing she had no such memories. Adlacion had called for someone to help change the temple. He told her that personally, and that was why she became his saint. Even the royal family did not dare interfere with the temple as it stood, so the kingdom sent her in the hope that she could reform it from within. But Lydianne admitted quietly that she was not here for the kingdom, she was here for him. It did not matter if he never loved her. Being useful to him was more than enough. At least that was what she believed. But ever since Amalda appeared, no one listened to her anymore. She could not even fulfill the expectations placed on her. She insisted that she was not sad about not being loved. What hurt was that she could not be of use to him. Eleanor listened carefully before asking if Lady Anne had ever had a friend. Lady Anne looked down, asking if Eleanor was mocking her. Eleanor hurried to reassure her. That was not it at all. Lady Anne shrugged and muttered that perhaps her words were simply not worth hearing. Eleanor countered that this was exactly what she meant. Lady Anne should tell Lord Adlacion everything she had just confessed. Lady Anne refused. She could never say that to him. She had only been chosen to reform the temple and nothing more. To him she was nothing now. Eleanor squeezed Lady Anne's hand. How could she know what Lady Anne felt when Lady Anne had never let anyone in? Lady Anne insisted that telling Eleanor would not fix anything. But Eleanor was certain that things might change, and that Lady Anne could not see everything clearly by herself. Eleanor explained that she could not fix Lady Anne's problems, but she could tell her something she seemed completely blind to. She had been speaking nonsense from the moment the conversation began, because Eleanor had seen it with her own eyes. The way Lord Adlacion looked at Lady Anne with such gentle eyes, the way he watched her the entire time Eleanor visited the mansion, how he seemed genuinely happy that Lady Anne had found a friend. People, including gods, feared him, yet his gaze softened only for her. Eleanor told her firmly that there was no way she was nothing to him. Lady Anne looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. She said she was not Adlacion's reincarnated saint. Eleanor argued that she could not say that for certain. The story said the girl returned only when Adlacion became human, and that she always remembered her past life. Only the two of them would ever truly know. If Lady Anne did not remember, she could not deny it either, and besides, Adlacion clearly cared for her now. That alone meant something. Lady Anne stared at Eleanor in disbelief. She told her she was simple-minded, and what if she was wrong? Eleanor declared that if that were the case she would throw a too-bad party to cheer Lady Anne up. Lady Anne finally smiled. If that happened, Eleanor would take full responsibility and she was not going to talk her way out of it. Eleanor groaned about the unfairness of it, which made Lady Anne giggle. Back at the temple, Eleanor's words echoed relentlessly through Rosalie's mind. She could not shake them. Her friends whispered behind her back. They laughed at her. She knew she was the true saint chosen by her god, even if he never appeared. Even if they had spoken only once, she was certain of it. That one time Loufre had been in Eleanor's room. She had been searching for him everywhere. There had to be a mistake. Lord Loufre would never betray her. She was the real saint. Slowly Rosalie formed a single conclusion. Eleanor was trying to steal Loufre from her. That was something she would never forgive. Meanwhile, Crowley sat by his window staring out at the trees that trembled under a rising darkness. He could feel corruption gathering in the distance, thicker and far more vicious than anything Eleanor had purified before. If she tried to take it all in, her body would not endure it. Yet if she did nothing, the outcome could be much worse. He forced himself to think positively. She had pushed through every crisis before. She would do so again. His thoughts scattered when Eleanor burst into the room. She arrived like a sudden gust of wind, bright-eyed and brimming with excitement. Her abrupt entrance startled Krail so badly that he jumped to his feet, asking if there was danger or something urgent happening. Eleanor grinned and told him to follow her outside. To his confusion, she announced that they were having a tea party. She had arranged a little table and several chairs beneath the shade of the trees. The idea had come from Lady Anne, who wanted to return the favor for everything Eleanor had done. Today she wanted to host the gathering herself so that Eleanor's god could relax freely without the eyes of half the temple staring at him. Eleanor insisted Krail join them, but he hesitated. His presence usually made people uncomfortable. Still he followed, and to his surprise the tea party was rather enchanting. There were colorful pastries, fragrant teas and delicate fruit tarts set carefully on lace cloths. It looked like something out of a storybook. Eleanor turned to Lady Anne and joked that she must not know what relaxing meant. Lady Anne immediately argued that she had planned everything perfectly and this was not overdone at all. She also explained that since Lord Adlacion was away today, she wanted to steal a chance to hear Eleanor's thoughts without interruption. Loufre appeared with a sigh, dramatically complaining that he was tired of being used as the pack mule. He turned to Krail with a friendly smile and assured him the comment was not aimed at him. Crowley quietly asked if he was out of place, but Loufre waved the thought away and told him he was fine. If anyone was out of place, it was him. After all, what kind of god got treated like a donkey? Eleanor and Lady Anne instantly snapped at him, reminding him that being invited to the tea party did not give him permission to call them by their nicknames. They also pointed out that they never once allowed him to compare himself to a donkey. The arguing soon melted into laughter, and in no time the three were chatting away. Krail, however, slipped aside for a moment to quietly observe from a distance. Eleanor's peaceful moment shattered when an uninvited girl marched up to her. She snapped that Eleanor had been missing for hours and everyone had been looking for her. Not only that, but rumors were spreading that she had been seen with Loufre. Eleanor turned around to prove the girl wrong, only to see that Loufre had conveniently vanished. The girl refused to drop the subject. She accused Eleanor of flirting with him, repeating gossip Rosalie had spread. Eleanor stood abruptly and demanded why she would ever flirt with Lefree. She barely tolerated him as a friend. The girl pressed on, saying Eleanor had been caught secretly meeting him and that people claimed he had been alone with her in her room. Eleanor protested that Lefree had barged in without permission, but the girl did not believe her. She warned that if Rosalie saw Eleanor now, the trouble would be far worse than gossip. Their argument continued until the girl finally confessed that she was trying to protect Eleanor. Rosalie had been in a terrifying mood lately. If she saw Eleanor here, insults would be the least of it. Before Eleanor could respond, Rosalie herself arrived. Her presence cut through the air like cold steel. She looked angrier and darker than before, as if something poisonous had taken root inside her. She declared loudly that she was the one true saint and that everyone else was standing in her way. She called Lady Anne a counterfeit, and accused Eleanor of shamelessly flirting with Lord Lefree. Then she turned on the girl Mari, calling her a traitor. Another girl rushed forward to stop Rosalie, but Rosalie shoved her aside. The girl tried to calm her, insisting she had nothing to worry about. She claimed Eleanor was just clinging to Lefree and that he was probably tired of her anyway. Her attempt to soothe Rosalie failed. Rosalie stared at her and said only, "You too then." Eleanor shouted for the girl to move, rushing in to push her out of harm's way. There was a deafening bang. In that instant, they all knew they should have run the moment Rosalie appeared. Lefree arrived in a burst of light to defend them, and for a moment Eleanor felt safe. He was ranked third, so surely he could handle this. But something was wrong. A violent force struck him and sent him flying across the field. He crashed into the ground near Lady Anne and groaned that he could not access his power at all. Eleanor hurried to Sophie, the girl she had pushed aside, trying to shake her awake. When she looked back at Lefree, confusion twisted in her chest. Why was he not doing anything? Why could he not fight back? Rosalie declared that she alone deserved to be loved and saved, and the gods should be the ones running to her side. Her voice dripped with possessiveness and madness. Suddenly Eleanor heard Krail behind her. His voice was low and urgent. "Do not turn around." But it was already too late. Eleanor turned and saw nothing but a towering mass of darkness rising behind them. It loomed over her and Sophie like a living shadow, and its voice rumbled that it would never forgive them. Before she could reach him, Crowley rushed forward and blocked her path. He told her to leave Lefree behind. He said he could take the corruption into himself while everyone else escaped. Eleanor refused to accept it. Even Lefree had been helpless. How could Crowley face this alone? Crowley steadied her shoulders and told her it was his responsibility. If a god absorbed too much corruption, he would become a wicked god that harmed humans. He could not allow that outcome or allow this chaos to spread. He urged her to go. He said he did not want to hurt her. Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks as she begged him not to leave. She pleaded that they should escape together. Crowley shook his head and quietly told her that she was only a stand-in. She did not owe him anything. Lefree's strained voice called from somewhere inside the darkness. He asked Eleanor what she was doing and reminded her that she could find a far better god than him. He told her the tea party had made it obvious. Her friends loved her. There were many gods out there who would treat her better. Crowley added that although their time together had been brief, he had been truly happy with her. Eleanor snapped. She shouted at him to stop talking like that. She said she was not leaving him and she did not want any other god. She did not care if she was temporary or a substitute. She told him he was allowed to be selfish if he wanted, but right now she was his saint, and she was not abandoning him. Crowley called her name, startled by the fierceness in her voice, but before anything more could be said, the world around them turned black. Lefree looked up through the shifting shadows, stunned. A brilliant light pierced through the darkness above. A figure stepped forward and the corruption recoiled from him. Lefree stared in disbelief. It was the Lord himself. Eleanor, who had felt the blast of energy, lay unconscious on the ground as the mysterious man reached out toward her. A warm glow spread from his hands and the blood staining her body vanished. Then he lifted her gently into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Every human who had ever wandered into this place took one look at the Lord, screamed and ran. The last time he had spoken to a human was so far in the past that even his memory had faded. He had grown used to the shouting, the stones thrown at him, the trembling fear in their eyes. Eventually he stopped feeling any of it. Their scorn no longer hurt. Their avoidance no longer bothered him. Even disappointment had dulled into something empty. He existed only to bear corruption. It was not a desire to protect anyone. It was simply what he had always done. The resentment inside him had been ignored so long it became silent. Sympathy and pity for humans had vanished even earlier. If he ever crossed the limit and became a wicked god that harmed people, he would not have cared. Hope, anger, sorrow, every delicate feeling he once had toward humans was long dead. Only resignation remained. And yet it had been about a month since that stand-in saint girl arrived. In those few weeks something strange had begun to stir in him. For the first time in ages he felt hints of happiness slip into his mornings. Looking back, everything had been unusual from the moment Eleanor appeared. Every day with her was noisy, chaotic, and reckless, but he had never once hated it. His long, numb routine of quietly absorbing corruption had been replaced with her laughter, her stubbornness, and her fearless way of standing beside him. Then he remembered the moment she refused to leave him, even when danger was swallowing everything around them. Her words had reached a place inside him he believed had died. Now he understood. This was what it felt like to want something again. He had thought all emotion toward humans was gone, yet here he was wishing for her safety. He wanted to protect Eleanor, not to endure corruption until he finally fell and became a wicked god. So Kral, now in his true form, a handsome man with pale hair and a quiet, steady gaze, lifted Eleanor into his arms and carried her away from danger. She eventually stirred, feeling as if she were drifting between dreams. When she looked up, she pressed her face against Kral's soft, blubbery skin. He had switched back before she woke enough to see what he really looked like. She poked his blob-like form with her finger and he told her it tickled. She thanked him for saving her. He admitted that he did not really understand what had happened himself, but what mattered was deciding what to do next. Eleanor looked around and saw the girls scattered across the ground, still unconscious. She asked the blob what they were supposed to do, guessing that waking everyone up should be their first step. So Eleanor went from girl to girl, shaking them gently back to consciousness. Once they all returned to the temple grounds, Kral explained what had happened. Lufre had grown weak from absorbing too much corruption, and he had been running from Rosalie because he simply could not overpower her magic. It was not that he refused to fight, he was unable to. Eleanor gave Lufre a smug look and told him he was acting far too proud for someone who collapsed so quickly. But it was not only Lufre. Most of the gods had been bearing corruption for so long their strength had nearly run dry. To make matters worse, many saints had been chosen through false revelations and the gods had grown disgusted, eventually refusing to appear before humans at all. Lufre grumbled that if Kral had cared so much about humans he could have admitted it earlier. If that was the case, he would have abandoned this temple long ago. He complained loudly about how idiotic everyone here was. He grabbed Kral and squeezed him as if he were a stress toy, and Eleanor shouted at him to take his hands off her god. Lydianne rushed over at the perfect moment and reminded them that this was not the time to fight. Corruption appearing was bad enough, but a temple saint causing it was far worse, and Rosalie still had not woken up. How were they supposed to explain this disaster to the priests? They all understood the severity of the situation. Lydianne's shoulders drooped. She said it was her fault. She had been sent here to reform the temple, but instead everything had collapsed even further. She muttered that maybe it was a blessing. Adlazanian was not here right now. She needed to fix this before he returned. But before she could even take a breath, Adlacion appeared behind her. Lydianne froze and bit her lip. She asked why he was here. He was supposed to be on duty. Adlacion placed his hands on her shoulders and asked if corruption had appeared. He asked if she had been caught in it. Lydianne stared at the ground and apologized. She said all of this happened because she was weak and failed to notice Rosalie's condition. To her shock, Adlacion did not care about any of that. His eyes softened with worry. All that mattered to him was that Lydianne was safe. He asked her again if she was hurt or feeling unwell. Lydianne whispered that she was fine, but her face still showed how upset she was.